a lot of my clients come in and they have debt, right? They've got student loans, sometimes credit card debt. And I think it's important to actually go back and kind of reflect on like, how did I end up here? And then also being able to say, okay, what do I want my life to look like? Like, how can I dream bigger, right?
Welcome to KEAL, where we focus on speaking about themes related to personal finance, personal development, your overall well-being. And on this episode, I have the distinct pleasure to speak with Brooke. How are you doing today, Brooke?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Brooke, it's an absolute pleasure. And if you get the chance after this episode, make sure to go check out her TED Talk, which was really, really incredible. And we'll put a link of that in the description and pinned comments below, so you can go have a gander at that and listen to an incredible speech from that. And Brooke, it's really, really important, I think, your story and your perspective on the theme around your own personal finances and debt, because I would like to ask you in a moment to actually share your story, how you went from being in a hole, so to speak, and now having an actual net worth, which is great, but just that the journey of that in general. But what's really, really troubling for a lot of people on a day-to-day basis is just the overwhelming burden, the stone, the pressure you feel on your mind, your chest, just on your overall self about not having, maybe money available to pay even just the small things, the utilities, the just food, providing for your family, but because you may be just overrun with the debt, tornado or whatever analogy you want to use for that. But the point is, I think a lot of people are really, really looking for a type of viable path forward, and in a way that they can actually feel like they can breathe, because the aspect of you not feeling well and you trying to just breathe through this situation can be a hard thing to balance. So tell us a little bit more about who is Brooke, why you're doing what you're doing to help other people in the way that you are, and your story, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the professional side of what I do and who I am. So I'm a personal finance coach. I have my small business, Money Life Mentor, and I do that. And then I also head up financial education and community at a startup called Carbon Collective. And Carbon Collective is a sustainable investing platform that's built for solving climate change. So those two things, I absolutely love what I do for work, because they're both centered on helping people use money as a tool to create whatever they want in their life. And I think that's so important, and something that I'm extremely passionate about, because really it started with my own experiences, right? Because firsthand, I saw in my own life how practicing financial wellness and learning about investing and personal finance could empower and enable me to create the life that I wanted. So it's been an incredible journey being able to work with clients and help them kind of see a similar success in their lives.
Is there a specific event in your life that made you want to get on this path, and what was it? And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my path is different in that I've kind of always been a nerd about personal finance. And I know you probably do not hear that a lot. I think that's why it kind of puts me in a good position to be sort of a mentor with my clients. But when I was about 16 years old, I started getting curious about money, because I started at my first part-time job. I was working at the public library in town, and, the first time I'm getting a paycheck, right? And I'm like, what should I do with this money? And I started reading, and the first book that I read was The Millionaire Next Door. And for anyone who hasn't read that book, it's a pretty old book. I think it was published in the late 90s. Still a great read. I think there's version 2 out at this point. But from what I remember in the original version, they tell a story about this elderly woman, and when she passes away, she leaves $1 million to charities and organizations of her choice. But her entire life, she lived a very frugal, very simple lifestyle. And that really clicked for me because growing up, I feel like at least I have this perception of wealth and wealthy people living these like ostentatious luxury lifestyles. And that never really appealed to me. But the idea of, living a simple life and being able to maybe even give back was something that I found extremely interesting. So that really sparked my interest in investing in personal finance. And then kind of the part two of that would definitely be when I graduated college, because I had about $15,000 of student loan debt, which I'm sure to some people that sounds much better than, the average amount of debt that some people come out of graduation with. But I knew that I had to do something about that. And that's when I really got serious about learning about personal finance and practicing financial habits.
Brooke, it seems like it's in a way easier for you to think about these financial matters if you have a goal in mind. So how important is that when you speak to your clients or just people that you teach on these matters, like to think about an end goal? Like how important is that aspect of it?
It's extremely important. And, what's interesting is a lot of people, they're not sure what their financial goals should be. And I kind of trace that back to most of us just haven't put in the intentional time to figure out what it is we really want our lives to look like. Right? We kind of sometimes get stuck in like that day-to-day cycle. And what I do, it's going to sound kind of funny because I'm a financial coach, but the first thing that I have my new clients do is I send them self-awareness journal prompts. So I send them a worksheet. It's got all of these journal prompts in it, and they write their responses in. And I find that these kinds of prompts really help people dig a little deeper, especially if they haven't necessarily put the time into figuring out what their vision is for their life. So I find that those can be extremely helpful. And so one of those prompts is, for example, what's your favorite memory from the past year of your life that you would love to relive? Because that's something where they're kind of reflecting on like, what experiences do I want to continue having and creating in my life? I also try to ask them, if money and finances were not an obstacle, like what would you do? Like the next 12 months, what would that look like for you? So that they can really start to kind of take the blockers off of their life vision and like just dream a little bit bigger. So I find that that's really helpful. And then, a lot of my clients come in and they have debt, right? They've got student loans, sometimes credit card debt. And I think it's important to actually go back and kind of reflect on like, how did I end up here? Right. So it's kind of like looking back at like, what's my mindset around finances? Where did that come from? Like, how did my parents or my guardian when I was growing up, how did they treat money and how did they view money? What are some of those snippets of conversations that you might remember overhearing in your childhood? And that can kind of start to help someone think about like, oh yeah, my parents said this and I went in the same direction or maybe the opposite direction, right? We kind of have those two different dichotomies. So it's kind of like a two-pronged approach of like reflecting on your past and how those money beliefs and modes of thinking around finances came to manifest in your own life and like this current situation. And then also being able to say, okay, what do I want my life to look like? Like, how can I dream bigger? Right.
That's a big thing because obviously like on this channel and before with Spearlift, like we were talking a lot about manifestation, and manifestation like is a very complex topic, but the variations of which it presents itself, ideally has to do with how you feel about what your life is, right? It's the feeling that is aligned with the thought, basically, right? For a very simple way of explaining that. So I'm not an expert, but just based on the conversations. But I think the point being, like, having that reflective aspect of your life and being aware of that, and then how you envision it either now and in the future. So how, I mean, that's not an easy process by any stretch of imagination, I can imagine. But so, like, what is it like, especially with the people you speak to about personal finance? If they're just in a situation now in the crux in their life where it's like, I can't, if I don't get out of this debt, my life's over, you know, like as far as my way of living, my way of being able to afford anything, just to
Mhm.
provide. How is it that they at least get on those small steps to be able to stay consistent with the end goal? How do you talk to your clients in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that that feeling of overwhelm is extremely common. So if anyone who's listening to this feels that way in their financial situation, just feels so overwhelming, know that that's completely normal. I think that's actually the biggest issue when it comes to someone tackling their personal finances, is because it feels like it's this giant mountain in front of you. And even taking that first step can feel extremely, extremely overwhelming. And I do find that doing that self-reflection process to start can be really helpful, because in order to move forward and take those first steps, you really do have to have some kind of a sense of what you want and what your why is, right? Like, why do you want to get your finances in order? Why is it important to you that you pay off this debt, or that you at least have a plan in place to build wealth and pay off debt? So figuring out what your why is, and I think like using the responses to self-awareness prompts like that can be really, really helpful. Whether you're writing them, typing them, speaking them, like whatever style works for you can be super helpful, because then you can take that and translate that into your goals. So you can kind of look at, I like to break out financial goals into short term and long term. So anything that's long term, typically I view that as at least 10 years away, oftentimes decades away. So the most common example would be eventually having a safe and comfortable retirement, right? That would be an example of a long-term goal that I would say the majority of us have. And then short-term goals, there's no set time frame, but really anywhere from a few months to, let's say, like 5 to 7 years. And then you might have a midterm category with like 7 to 10 years, right? So I think if you can go back to your vision for your life, and like, what is it that I want to create? What kind of lifestyle do I want? What's my ideal living situation? And kind of start to map, like, go work backwards and map that out. So how does that translate into, 3 to 5 short-term goals? For example, if, let's say, you decided that you really want to take a trip with your two best friends once a year, and maybe you're doing that in December. So you would see, how many months until then, and what's my savings goal? What's my total savings goal? And then working out, okay, if that's my end goal for that, that's how much I think I need. So how much per month should I be setting aside in a separate savings account so that I can hit that short-term goal?
It's a big deal what you're saying, especially in regards to starting with the end in mind and working backwards. I love that, because that way, like, you have the feeling, you have the picture in your mind of where you want to be and what you want to be doing, and then you work back to try to reach that. I think that's a really valuable insight. And for me, it's like that as well. When it's always, the only thing that comes to my mind is being on, this beautiful beach here in Acapulco and having barbecue every afternoon after I finish work, and just going in the ocean as much as possible during the day. So I'm trying to work back from that and see how to get there. But it is a process. And like, how important is it from your perspective, Brooke, with this idea of, like, you have to be really disciplined and be on this track and trying to fix your situation and then keep the end goal in mind of what you really want for your life. But do you encourage people that you speak with and how you teach and help people, as far as maybe having an accountability partner, someone to help you along this way so you're not feeling like you're doing it all on your own?
Yes, absolutely. I would say having an accountability partner is an incredible idea. I think it's so important. And I would highly encourage anyone listening to just start to open up money conversations with your friends, because money, as you know, can be a really sort of taboo subject in a lot of different cultures. So, and if we're not able to freely talk about a topic, it's not necessarily going to lead to growth and shared learnings, right? So I think the more that we can talk about money with our friends and have that accountability, the better. And a quick like point of advice for that is I would start by asking your friends, like, what exciting experiences are they saving for? Like, what goals do they have around their finances? And then you can kind of start to think about, okay, so we both have these goals that we're working towards individually. So how can we best support each other? Maybe it's maybe it's like a quick 20-minute call at the last Sunday of every month to kind of see, hey, how did you do this past month with your budget? Where are you at on your savings goal? And that way you have somebody to talk through when it gets difficult, as it does, right? And then also to celebrate those little milestones along the way. I think having an accountability partner is such a great idea.
Do you have, just out of curiosity, do you have one yourself?
I do. Yes, I do. My accountability partner is also, I call her my business bestie. So we talk about how we're growing our business. We share ideas and things like that. And we also use that as financial accountability as well, which is really nice.
You must be on the top of your game then when it comes to all this. um, Brooke, what, from your perspective, is there such thing as good versus bad debt? I mean, or like healthy debt versus bad debt. What I mean by that, like having, for credit and for the bank and everything else, if there is a sort of line of, okay, they're paying their mortgage on time, that helps with the credit, or paying their student loan. I don't know. For me personally, I don't think any debt's necessarily that good, but is there debt where if you, I don't know, like maintain it and pay it off well enough, then you're okay? Or how do you view that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's this myth also around carrying a debt balance and how that can help your credit score, which is not really true. So, anytime you have debt, you, of course, at least want to be paying the minimums, right? If that's possible for your situation. But carrying a debt balance is not necessarily going to help you, let's say, like boost your credit score. Paying on time absolutely does, paying in full does, but carrying that balance, in most cases, that's actually going to hurt your credit score, right? So if you do, with your credit score, some things that are even more important than, let's say, like having a mortgage that you're paying off every month, and you're never late on. Other things that can help is, having a credit history. So the length of credit history can be really helpful there. So like, let's say that you've had a credit card for 10 or 15 years. That's one of the most important pieces of your like credit profile, right? And then also like your credit limits. So like, let's say you're only using $3,000 a month across your credit cards, but if you wanted to, you could spend up to 25,000, right? You're not going to do that, but credit, when they're looking at your credit score, they take into account credit utilization. So basically they're just looking at, okay, of the limit, what percentage every month are they actually using, right? So there's never really a time where it makes sense to create debt for the purpose of building credit.
Yeah, it is kind of a game, isn't it? I mean, like you want to have in the end as much accessibility to have discretionary spending as possible, but there is this game within the system, if quote unquote, of how to pay and this and that, so that you can, if need to, have other quote unquote lines of credit to purchase other things in case you don't have enough cash, maybe, right? Maybe you want a beautiful RV trailer thing that's just top of the line, traveled all over the country, all over the world, but you maybe still need a credit line for that. And if you have been a good person growing up and paid everything on time, then maybe you can get it. I don't know, something like that. So, but again, with that
Yeah.
end goal in mind, as you're saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the trailer purchase is a really good example of something where if you're building that self-awareness around what you want to do in your life in the next 5 to 10 years, that's something where, okay, we might set a short-term savings goal of, all right, I need, let's say, 25,000 to buy the trailer that I want. And then you could see, all right, in 3 years from now, that's how much time I have from when I think I will want to purchase this item. So I'm going to automatically allocate X dollars every paycheck to this savings account for that trailer. Mm-hmm. Like that would be the ideal way to do it, right? I think, right. Of course, what most people do would be, I want this, I'm going to put it on my credit card, right? And I think that is where the self-awareness piece comes back in and can be so important.
Big time, and that's one of the most important things, have been learning for these last couple of years is just this idea of self-awareness, because there's such a lack of it, and even myself personally trying to become more and more like that, can also be a great challenge. But I mean, you really have to consciously do that and practice different modalities to do that for yourself and just for those around you more than anything too. It's a big deal.
Absolutely.
And Brooke, we only have time for one last question. Unfortunately, it just flies by always, but just want to ask you one last thing to leave our audience and maybe give some valuable insight for them. What can they do starting today if they're in a situation where they're just in the worst economic situation? What would just the practicalities of just starting to move forward from their situation so they can just feel a little bit better tomorrow?
Yes, of course. This is a great question. I find with my clients, and again, some of my clients, when they come to me, they have sometimes $100,000 of debt between student loans and credit card debt. So I find that actually getting real on what your numbers are can take a lot of the stress off, right? Because a lot of the anxiety around finances come from not knowing. Mm-hmm. It's that not having a clear sense of how much I owe, what the monthly payments are, the interest rates, what my expenses are. It just feels like money's coming in and going out, and you owe this huge sum of money sometimes, right? And it feels like it's a black box to people. So when you can lift that cover off and look at all of your numbers, that's when a lot of people are like, okay, I see the numbers. This is my situation. And they almost start to accept it, right? It's like, okay, it's here in this spreadsheet or whatever you're using. All the numbers are here. And now I can make a path forward. Whereas before it all felt like it was in this black box, and it's really hard to make a plan and also come to terms with it just mentally, emotionally, the debt or whatever it is that you're going through if you don't have all of the information in front of you. So I would say the first step would be to pick a method for how you want to go about that in terms of like getting the numbers out there. I personally like to use a spreadsheet because I use Google Sheets because I think it forces people to manually go in and look up their numbers, right? Like log into all of your debtor, creditor accounts and put the numbers in there. Same with like an expense tracker. So get real on like, okay, what are my average monthly expenses? And going through each category, and maybe for the last 3 months, looking at for each of the subcategories of expenses, what's my average spend for each of these? And like physically putting that into the spreadsheet, I find can be really useful. And then you can have a second tab for debt where, let's say, I like to recommend ordering your different debts in order of highest interest rate first, like right at the top. Have a different line item for each debt, each student loan, each amount that you owe for different credit cards. and arrange that in order of the highest interest rate first, because that's where I would start, right? Because interest rates can either help you with investing, for example, or they can hurt you. For example, when you owe money on a credit card. So I would start with those two things in terms of getting your numbers out, looking at everything. I'm sure a lot of us need to figure out what our logins are for these different accounts, right? Uh, but once you have that, then you can look at the numbers and be a little bit more objective about it instead of getting stuck in the emotional aspect of it, right? And feeling that deep overwhelm.
So valuable. So valuable, those insights, Brooke. And what I really appreciate about what you're saying in relation to this is that you just gotta throw everything on the table. Like, you just bring it all and then actually look at it. Because again, like, for I think something that I think is really valuable to do is, like, I take a lot of notes. You probably can't see well there, but a lot of bullet point notes on what I'm doing throughout the day. And because the more it's out of here and physically somewhere, the better, because it becomes like, if it's all in the mind and stays there, it's just like trapped energy, right? But if you just, like you're saying, throw it all on there and say, okay, this is the reality. How do I align myself to feel about this situation? And then you really, really start going through the critical analysis of, like, okay, priority number 1, 2, 3, goals, do. But you have to, like, there's something about that process, what you're saying is just so valuable, because once you get it out and then you see it all, it can become like its own stress reliever, right? It's like, minimizing the pressure valve, because it's just like, you can figure out then how to actually handle the situation. It's not just some nebulous thing in your mind. So I think that's really, really incredible, the way that you do that yourself and help others. And Brooke, just as we conclude, where can our audience, on the podcast platform, on the video stream platform, where can everyone connect with you, follow you, and even work with you one-on-one?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely reach out to me on Instagram. I am at Money Life Mentor, and my website is moneylifementor.com. And then I just worked with the team at Carbon Collective to publish a free sustainable investing guide. So if that's something that anyone is interested in, that's at carboncollective.co.
Perfect. So we'll make sure to include all Brooke's information in the comments, the description box, everywhere we are on the socials, on the podcast platform as well. So please make sure to check out Brooke, check out her work, connect with her, and we'll also include her link to her TED Talk. So go watch that right now as well. And it was an honor to have you on this episode, Brooke, and we thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Take care, everyone.